The Elastic Man, the owner of the famous deadly left leg, the player who inspired Diego Maradona. Roberto Rivelino was one of football's geniuses. At his peak, only two players rivaled him, Beckenbauer and Cruyff. After the King's retirement, Rivelino took over the Brazilian national team as one of its most important stars. When the King rested, someone needed to take his throne, and Rivelino was strong enough to claim his place. And I can say that he succeeded. He was a formidable player. Powerful shots, dribbles worthy of a genius, and an undisputed idol of Corinthians and Fluminense. One of the greatest in football history. But who would have thought that, at the beginning of his life, he was a Palmeiras fan? Rivelino came from an Italian family but was born in São Paulo. To understand that moment in the city's history, we need context. The metropolis was receiving hundreds of European immigrants at the time, mainly Italians, due to the destruction in Europe and Brazil's economic rise. Thus, Rivelino's family settled in the city, and being Italians, started supporting Palestra Italia, now known as Palmeiras. They were passionate about the team, and little Riva was too. His biggest dream was to play for Alviverde Paulista and become a great player for the club. Rivelino started in futsal, where he learned to execute quick, short dribbles, developing his signature style. It was also during this time that he began practicing his powerful shots. But he was still just a kid. Even so, a Palmeiras scout noticed the boy and invited him to a tryout with the club. Rivelino was ecstatic, barely able to breathe when he heard the news. But after going through the selection process, he discovered he hadn't been chosen by the Green Team. At first, Rivelino was very sad about being rejected, but then came the anger. He wanted to be a player, he wanted to win, so he tried another trial, this time with Corinthians. If his beloved club didn't want him, he would go to their biggest rival and stop loving Palmeiras. And that's exactly what he did. Guess what happened? He was accepted. His left leg stood out, a boy so small doing what he did. He had to be a star, the Corinthians coaches thought, and they were right. That player would become one of the greatest of his era. Rivelino spent a good amount of time in the youth ranks. By 1964, at just 18 years old, he was already a recognized talent, drawing crowds to the stadiums just to watch him play. And yes, crowds. Back then, TVs weren't like they are today, so many people preferred going to the stadium to see their favorite players up close. Rivelino was already known as a promising talent for Corinthians. During one of the youth training sessions, one of his teammates, Sergio Echigo, performed a different dribble that Rivelino had never seen before. The star asked his friend to teach him. That same day, Rivelino was already trying to replicate the move, but it took him a few days to turn that simple dribble into his signature move. And so, the famous flip-flap was born, a nightmare for defenders in any defensive system. One of Corinthians' midfielders got injured during training, and knowing Rivelino's skill, the coach promoted him to the starting team. That didn't surprise anyone. On the contrary, many said it was about time he was tested as a professional. But despite the promotion, Riva would face another huge challenge, or rather several. Pelé's Santos, Tostão's Cruzeiro, Palmeiras' legendary Academia squad, and the great teams from Rio de Janeiro. The Corinthians squad was mostly made up of youth players who knew Rivelino, but how could they compete against such powerhouses? No matter how well organized a team was, if Pelé was on the other side, the challenge was immense. When we played against Santos, we already knew that Pelé would score at least one goal. People used to say at the time. Corinthians was going through difficult times, and their rivals were the giants of the era. But that didn't shake Rivelino. On the contrary, it made him even more determined to win titles for the club that had given him his first opportunity. Corinthians' big moment came in the 1966 Rio-São Paulo tournament. But even back then, the scheduling of matches was completely chaotic. They scheduled the competition too close to the World Cup when the tournament was about to reach the semifinals. The 1966 World Cup began, and the four finalists were declared champions: Santos, Botafogo, Vasco, and Corinthians. This was the first and only title Rivelino won with the Alvinegra jersey. But that title didn't mean much to Riva. What he really wanted was the Campeonato Paulista, the most coveted trophy of the time. It was during this period that Rivelino received his first call-ups to the Brazilian national team. However, he wasn't usually a starter, as the competition was fierce. Tostão and Jairzinho were ahead of him. Coach João Saldanha preferred the veterans over the young star already shining at Corinthians. But with Saldanha's departure and Zagallo's arrival, Rivelino started getting called up more frequently, and beyond that, secured a place in the starting lineup. Zagallo built an attacking scheme with Jairzinho, Tostão, Gerson, Pelé, and the young Rivelino. Alongside absolute legends, Rivelino shone brilliantly in the 1970 World Cup in Mexico. He made his mark right in Brazil's opening match against Czechoslovakia, scoring a stunning free-kick goal in a 4-1 victory. In the quarterfinals, Riva scored again, helping Brazil beat Peru 4-2. His last goal in the tournament came in the tense semi-final against Uruguay, when he unleashed a powerful shot to secure a 3-1 win and a spot in the final. That kid was insane. The power in his legs was out of this world. The Mexicans couldn't believe Rivelino's skill and flair. His celebrations, filled with both rage and joy, perfectly embodied the Brazilian fans, who exploded with excitement after each victory. Then came the final, and the result was clear: a 4-1 thrashing of Italy and a third World Cup title for the most spectacular national team on the planet. Many still say that squad was the greatest in football history. During the tournament, Mexican fans gave Rivelino the nickname Patada Atomica, atomic kick, because of the strength and accuracy of his shots. The star had finally reached his peak and won the most important title of his career: World Champion. Back at Corinthians, he remained the team's standout player. Without a doubt, he was the most skilled player on the squad. But that wasn't enough. Rivelino couldn't carry the team alone, and the club endured another 4 years without winning anything significant. But the 1974 World Cup was approaching, and the dream of a fourth title was real. In Germany, Rivelino wore Brazil's number 10 jersey. However, this time, he couldn't lead the team to the final. Without the same magic from 4 years earlier, Brazil fell to Cruyff's Netherlands, losing 2-0 in the semifinals. In the third-place match, another defeat, this time to Poland, 1-0, and so ended Rivelino's second World Cup and, with it, the dream of the fourth title, which would take a few more years to become reality. But do you think that was the worst thing that happened to the star? That same year, on December 22nd, Rivelino faced Palmeiras, but this time in the Campeonato Paulista final. It was Corinthians' great hope of finally winning a major title after years of failure. The fans put all their faith in their biggest star. In the previous match, Corinthians had drawn 1-1 with a goal from Riva. But on the day of the final, the weight of responsibility hit him hard. It wasn't fear of Palmeiras, it was the fear of what would happen if they lost that title. The final was tight and fiercely contested. In the end, Palmeiras scored and won the match inside Corinthians Stadium. During the game, Luis Pereira had already comforted Rivelino, but that image was later used to attack him. The Corinthians fans were furious, accusing their star of disappearing in the final and even of favoring the rival. The pressure on him was immense, and the club's management wasted no time in taking action. We all know how club directors in Brazil operate. When they're under pressure, they need to find a scapegoat. And this time, the target was Rivelino. He was relentlessly criticized until he made a decision to leave the club. Years later, Rivelino was asked about Corinthians and responded without hesitation. "Oh, Corinthians is everything to me. It was the club that gave me my first opportunity. I will always love this club, no matter what they did." Practically expelled from Corinthians, Rivelino secured his transfer to Fluminense, which was beginning to assemble a great team in 1975. Fate had it that the star's debut with the tricolor jersey was in a friendly match against Corinthians, and Riva didn't hold back. He put on a real show. Fluminense won 4-1, with 3 of those goals coming from him. That performance was a foreshadowing of what was to come. Alongside Felix, Marco Antonio, Paulo Cesar Cahu, Manfrini, and Gil, Rivelino won his long-awaited title with a club, the 1975 Campeonato Carioca. The title was secured ahead of time in the final quadrangular. That season, he scored one of the most fantastic goals of his career against Vasco. He pulled off a flip-flap, passed 2 more defenders, and then found the back of the net. Pure genius. The only setback of the year came in the Campeonato Brasileiro, where the star couldn't stop another great team. International with Figueroa and Falcone. After shining in 1975, Fluminense lost some important players, but managed to keep a strong team, and, for many, even a better one, in 1976. This was due to President Francisco Horta, who invested heavily in the club. The cherry on top was the signing of none other than Carlos Alberto Torres, one of the best right-backs in football history. At Fluminense, he played as a center back and, as expected, he impressed. With an even more talented squad, the tricolor team began to captivate the world with its football art. The team toured Europe and returned with the title of the Paris tournament, held in the French capital. Along with Fluminense, the tournament featured Paris Saint-Germain, the European selection, and the Brazilian Olympic selection. The tricolor debuted against PSG and won 2-0, with both goals coming from Rivelino. The title was secured, and the European press dubbed him the best in the world. Fluminense also won the Viña del Mar Cup in Chile after a 1-0 victory over Unión Española and a goalless draw against the Chilean side Everton. After dazzling Europeans and South Americans, it was time to return to Brazil. In the 1976 Campeonato Carioca, Fluminense was dominant. Rivelino played magnificently. The club played 32 games, winning 23, drawing 7, and losing just 2. The highlight was the offensive, lethal tricolor attack. The team easily won the state championship. However, once again, the team was eliminated in the Campeonato Brasileiro, this time by Corinthians. In 1978, Rivelino suffered an injury that kept him from playing most of Brazil's matches in the World Cup in Argentina. From the bench, he saw Brazil claim the symbolic title of world champion, immortalized by coach Claudio Coutinho. The star only played in the third-place match, where Brazil beat Italy 2-1. That was his last World Cup, and also his farewell to the green and yellow jersey. Still in 1978, Rivelino accepted a lucrative offer to play in Saudi Arabia. He stepped away from the spotlight but continued to shine. There, he won the long-awaited national title with Al Hilal. In 1981, at 35 years old, Rivelino decided to retire. He entered history as one of the most talented midfielders in world football and one of the greatest left-footed players in the sport. Capable of any dribble or genius play, he was a true artist of the ball. With a World Cup title in his resume, several club titles, and numerous individual awards, Rivelino always said that he would trade everything for a title with Corinthians. That was his only debt in football, a debt that could never be repaid. Even without that dream trophy, Rivelino is one of the greatest idols in the club's history. For Fluminense, he is considered the greatest star of all time, an immortal genius.